Hey everyone, this is Jason from Alvatone Audio, and today is Tool Talk Day. So the last year in the shop was really busy for me. I was doing a lot of work, a lot of new things, doing a lot of experimenting, and I'm always looking for new ways to do a higher quality of work, and all other things equal, if I can do that work faster, then all the better. Now, having said that, I've had to take a look at some of the tools that I'm using every day to see if I can get something a little bit better, something that's going to make a job easier, faster, and get a better result out of those tools. Historically, I've always been a pretty frugal dude, don't spend a lot of money on stuff that I don't absolutely need. However, when it comes to tools, I can't remember a time where I've spent a little bit extra to get a higher quality tool and regretted it. I feel like that money always comes back, not only if not in the longevity of the tool, but just like the quality of the work that I can do with that tool. So, took a look at the stuff that I typically use every day. We're just going to look at some of the small subsets, some of the hand tools, and some of the reasons, or some of the reasoning that I put into and looking for replacements. So basically, whenever I buy a tool, I have three requirements for it. One, I want to love it. Which means that every time I pick it up, I don't want to say, oh, I really like this tool, except for this one thing. If I can get something that's as close to perfect as possible, I will do it, assuming it doesn't cost, $1 million or something like that. I really want to almost kind of have the tool become transparent just so I can focus on what the work that I'm doing with the tool. Second, I want it to last forever, because if I found a tool that I love, I don't ever want it to break or lose or get stolen or something like that. So longevity and quality definitely plays into my purchase decisions. And third, I want it to be precise, which means I want to be able to do a higher quality of work with the new tool than I could with the previous version of the tool. I want it to be more accurate. I don't want there to be play or slop and anything like that. So basically, a lot of the tools I have here, they're getting replaced because I'm tired of the slop and say like the movable joints of my pliers for my cutters. I don't like the rattle in my multi-use drivers, multi-screwdrivers, this kind of stuff. I don't like the gaps in the blades of my diagonal cutters, all that kind of stuff. So that has to go, and we're going to bring in some new stuff that's hopefully going to allow me to do some better work. Okay, I'm going to break this into a few categories. The first one being wire cutters or diagonal cutters, and I'm also going to put links to all the new stuff down in the description. So if you missed the name or model number of a tool, don't worry, just check the description and it will be there. So starting off with the stuff that I do have, two pair of just standard diagonal cutters. Both of these are well past their prime. I've had these things so long, I literally cannot remember when or where I got them. The thing about diagonal cutters is when you close them, you obviously want the blades to be touching, right? You don't want a gap in there, and these both gap a little bit. So when you're cutting like multi-strand wire, which most audio wire is, it never gets through all of the individual strands, and it's just a pain, and you don't get clean cuts. This I just use for just cutting stuff off the reel. This is actually a fairly recent acquisition. I got this a few years ago. Like $5 or $7 or something at the big box, and I love the form factor of it, but it's already starting to chip. And they always say on these, it's like, for copper or aluminum only, like no cut steel. And I guarantee the only thing I've ever cut with these is just copper-based audio cable. So there's no reason why these should be chipping or why I should have this much wear and tear on the blade. So I just feel like these are just gonna go to crap sooner than later. So I was looking for a replacement for those. And something I'm not gonna replace, but something I use all the time, the Stanley 10499. Not sure how relevant the model number really is, but it's always nice to have a good utility knife, and one of the things I like about this, or just a feature that I would look for in any utility knife, is you have to make sure that you have nice, convenient blade storage, because you always have the tendency to let your blade just get really dull, like way too dull for use. So I tend to change mine out as soon as I even think it's starting to get dull. One, just because you don't get great cuts, and two, a dull blade is an unsafe blade. So I always like to make sure that I have those nice, sharp blades on hand. Just open up the screwdriver, it only takes about a minute, and you have a fresh blade to keep working. So the new stuff is, I got a few because these are pretty cheap and easy to experiment with. These are the most popular and also the cheapest diagonal cutters on Amazon. These are the Hakko CHP 170s. Run you $5, and they kind of feel like it. I mean, they feel okay, but the thing about these is if you hear that clicking, when you put when you squeeze it shut, well, first of all, there's a huge gap. I mean, you can see it. It's as bad as these other ones I have over here. And then when you squeeze it again, yeah, it's the blades just kind of overlapping one another. So I don't really feel like I'm going to get clean cuts on it. So that's a little bit of a disappointment. But then I got these two Xurons, the blue one being the 170-2A and the red one being the 2175 Maxi-Shear flush cut. These are marketed, at least on the company's website, towards craft makers, jewelry makers, that kind of thing. But they're really nice. I like them so far. No gaps between the blades. They form up nice and tight, nice and solid. They have just enough resistance to open. Like the springs are just strong enough to kind of to open them without being overly fatiguing on the hand. Basically got like a small pair and a slightly bigger pair. So I'm looking forward to using those. Now for just cable cutting purposes, I got the Wiha, if you sprechen Sie Deutsch. If you do not, it's just Wiha. The Wiha 32600 soft grip cable cutter, 6.3 inches. I mean, the quality of these things, this is great. I mean, everything this brand makes is fantastic. There's like no play at all in there. They really feel nice in your hand. Just really, really solid. I like these. I don't know if I love them though, because even if you look at how far you have to open them, even just like a standard instrument kind of cable, you have to open them pretty far, which makes it just a little uncomfortable to use single-handed, because you really have to stretch your fingers out. I don't have small hands, but I guess I don't have the biggest hands either, but you really just have to stretch your fingers out just so you can get the cable in there to cut it. Now, when you do cut it, it's definitely like knife through butter. These things are like razor sharp right out of the box. Even though I don't love it, I mean, they certainly work. I'll probably hold on to them to see if I can get used to them. Maybe when they break in a little bit, it'll just be a little bit easier to open up. Now, for the big stuff, like the big multi-pair, 12 pair, 16 pair, because this wasn't quite big enough because I have some 12 pair over in the corner and it doesn't even fit inside here. So I had to go back and I got the big guys. These are the Channellock 911 cable cutting pliers at 9.5 inches. And I mean, I don't think there's an audio cable out there that you're not gonna be able to cut with this. If there is, I haven't seen it. So, and again, this stuff, chewing through that 16 pair, like no problem with these. So this is for the big stuff, and I never had a pair this big before, and it's super nice because, like I said, I was cutting up some 12 pair earlier, and it just makes the job effortless. So I'm glad to have these. Next up is pliers. For the needle nose, this is an old German set that I've had for like a really long time. It's definitely kind of more with their connects. They definitely have a little bit of a lower end feel. I mean, I kind of like them, but I definitely don't love them. And in general, for what I need, and generally what I'm using pliers for is if you look at like this Switchcraft crimp style strain relief you have on these, that's pretty much what I use pliers for most of the time. They're just a little bit big, and there's just a little bit of flex down here where they get really, really thin. These are definitely very nice for getting like small parts that may have dropped down into like an enclosure or something like that. If you're just like working on gear and something falls down in like a rack mount piece of equipment, this is really good for retrieving stuff like that. But for actually like holding on to something or manipulating something, you're just a little on the weak side. Now over here for just your standard pliers, these are Channellock 526, and Channellocks are great. And there's a lot of tools I looked at Channellock for replacing. These are, I believe, all made in the USA and really good quality. I've had these a long time, and they're definitely banged up, but they still feel pretty good. But again, they are, because it's on, you know, with this one of those type of pliers where you can, depending on how much grab you need, you can open them up a little bit. And again, with trying to get more precise and just removing the slop in some of the tools, I just wanted to go with a standard fixed set. And I generally don't, let's say I don't need to grab anything that big. If I do, I have bigger pliers for it. So these two are out, and what is coming in are the Knipex. So when people talk about brands, especially on pliers, like especially like electricians or lineman pliers or wire tying pliers, Knipex comes up a lot. For a lot of people, this is like a desert island kind of brand, and I've never before actually like splashed out the cash for them because they are expensive. But the good news is they make a ton of different tools. If you go through the catalog, I mean, there's so many different sizes and varieties and specialty tools and all that kind of thing. So the good thing about it is you can definitely find the tool that you need. Chances are they would make it if you need something like this. So I decided to give them a try. These are the first ones. These combination pliers, these are the 03-02-160 combination pliers, 6.3 inches. And on the needle nose pliers, these are the 25-02-160, 6 1/4 inch chain nose is what they call them. These have what they call a comfort grip, as opposed to, like if you go back to Channellocks where they just have like this vinyl coated and it's just not very thick. These actually kind of come both ways. They come with just a standard vinyl coating, but this is what they call the comfort grip. And I really, really like it. It's just a little bit thicker. And especially on something like this where you really need to grab down and bear down on something, it just feels a little bit more solid in your hand. And again, you squeeze these really hard. There's just like practically like you get just a small amount of flex back here in the very end. There's no vertical play or rotational play in these whatsoever. And even the cutters on here, you put those together, no gaps, really sharp right out of the box. And again, these, I wanted something a little bit shorter. This is the perfect size for me, and they're not quite as thin on the end. There's a little bit of thickness, so it feels like when you grab something, it's just really, really solid. Of course, not as solid as these, but it's definitely as solid as I need. And again, as far as price goes, these aren't the most expensive ones you can get because they're still on the small side, but I'm really looking forward to breaking these guys in. Next up, we have the screw and the nut drivers. So I think just about everyone has got one of these like multi-tip all-in-one screwdrivers, either ratcheting or not. This Stanley I've had forever. This one I picked up, I don't know, not too long ago, a few years ago, this Cobalt, and it's held up pretty well. I definitely ended up chipping and breaking the Phillips tips on these, but you can actually get replacements for just a few bucks, because I actually like the way this feels. Obviously not for electrical stuff because it's all metal, but I actually kind of like this one. This one is just, for general, way too long, which means that there's just a lot of play back and forth like this, and plus it's ratcheting, so it's always... you don't have to move this very far, and because it's actually just, you know, along the way you would normally turn your hand, it's very easy to turn it on when you don't want it on. And the bits have this weird storage thing where you have to turn it and like smack it against your hand to get the... Yeah, anyway, so this is no good. I mean, I still use it around the house, that kind of stuff, right? But I definitely want to get it out of the workshop toolbox, right? As far as nut drivers, I've never really had to have a ton of them. These are the last remaining fragments of a Radio Shack set that I bought. I mean, again, like so long ago, I can't remember. And they're terrible. They're like sandpaper on your hand. Like there's no finish. They're just kind of weak. And the reason I mean, a lot of them are just broken or cracked or that kind of thing. So these are just not great. And I'm gonna start doing a lot more panel work. So I need a decent set of nut drivers for sure. So these get retired to the standard domestic use toolbox, and they get replaced with a few things to start. Standard screwdrivers on the small side. This is the Wiha 26199 slotted and Phillips screwdriver set, 8 pieces with the pouch. And these are great. It's basically 4 slotted, 4 Phillips. The Phillips, it starts with a standard 1-bit and goes all the way down to the PH000. Very, very small, really nice for component work. And on the blades, they go from basically, starting at 4 all the way down to 1. And these are nice because they're a precision set, but they're not too precision, not too finicky. They still, especially this number 1, which gets a lot of use, still feels really, really solid. It's a nice thick piece of metal on there. It doesn't flex or bend or anything like that. It does have the rotating tip if you need to do this kind of thing, which is nice. And the handle is thin, but it's not so thin that you can't really put a little bit of torque onto it. I'd say if it's any bigger, I mean, how much torque do you really need to put on a number 1 screw, right? So this is a great set. That's for screws. Nut drivers, same thing. This is the Wiha 26598 nut driver set in metric. And this goes from 2.5 millimeter to 6 millimeters with 0.5 millimeter breaks between each one. So 2.5 millimeter to the smallest to 6 millimeter on the biggest. So for metric, I definitely tend to go towards the smaller stuff. I really don't use anything larger than like an M3, but it's nice to have those couple bigger ones in there. On the Imperial side, Husky, and this was just a little lucky. This was a big box buy, and this whole set was only $15. Now, if you get into like looking at different brands and stuff, if you look at all the socket sets and that kind of stuff, you get into like mechanics forums. You know, some people use Husky because they're cheap, but a lot of people bang on them. And now the fact is, if you're really a mechanic and you're cranking on engines and that kind of stuff all day, then maybe you want something a little bit more durable than your Huskies. But for what I'm doing, they are plenty strong enough. And these first 4 here, the 3/16, 1/4, 5/16, and 11/32, that's going to get me everything, basically a 440 nut all the way up to a 632 nut, which is pretty much 99% of everything I'm going to be using. Because, like I said, I'm doing a lot more of this panel work. And those are the screw sizes that I use a lot. So again, I linked all this stuff in the description. I actually linked to the same set on Amazon, which runs like $30. You can find it locally cheaper, by all means get it. And then in addition to those, just a few open-ended and closed-end wrenches. Huskies as well. These just are not a set or anything. These are just loose out of the bin. I think I paid average about $2.50 each for these. And I wanted to get both, and again, just to experiment. I mean, to spend an extra $10 to get the wrenches is not that bad of an investment. Again, when you're doing panels, if you have a perfectly flat panel, it's no problem to get a wrench in there and get the nut. But if you have a flange panel like this, it's just not going to work. You can't get in there. That's why you need the nut drivers on these. So I think the wrenches, it's a little bit more convenient to use, just because you can hold that nut down with your finger, get it with the driver from the other side. So it's nice to have both. And again, for like 25 bucks for all these, it's nice to have those options. Also, the nice thing with cheaper sets is, depending on when you get into this panel work, if you look at the difference between the hole, like this, that distance between the hole where the actual jack goes and the hole where the screw goes, there's only a certain amount of room in there. And depending on what nut size you're actually using and the size of the barrel of the plug that you're going to put in there, you only have a certain amount of room for the wall thickness of the tool to get in there. So if I end up standardizing on one of these sizes and you get into like a particular size jack that's just a little bit big, I'm not really going to have a lot of qualms about taking these nut drivers and actually putting on the grinder and grinding a little bit of the wall thickness off just to make sure that it always fits in there. You don't have to grind the whole way around, you just have to do it on one side, and that ground side is always going to go on the side where the connector barrel is. And then you can always just use that tool just for this one purpose of panel work where you just don't have a whole lot of clearance. So that's one advantage where I don't mind buying a slightly cheaper tool. And again, I'm not cranking on engines with these things. This is going to be plenty strong for me, I believe. Next up is wire strippers, a super common tool for me, and I've been using just Kleins just forever, just because you can kind of get them anywhere and they're not too expensive. This one in particular I've had a really, really long time. These two I got more recently. This is everything from like 10 gauge all the way down to 32 gauge on these, and these ones are nice because they also have the bolt cutters in there, which I will use from time to time for the smaller bolts. The only problem with these is once they start to get dull, or if they bend a little bit, you kind of end up having to replace the whole tool, which is kind of a drag. It's not the end of the world because, like I said, they're not that expensive, but I also was just looking for something a little bit better, because you have to have a little bit of technique with these, because, you know, once you clamp down on the wire, if you start to pull away from you a little bit, like maybe you're peeling vegetables or something like that, it's very easy to shear off the wire, and along with the insulation that you're trying to take off. So you can actually do some wire damage to these if you're not careful. You start to get a little sloppy. So wanted to look for something a little bit more controlled, and there's a lot of products out there, but the one I settled on was the Stripmaster. This is made by Ideal, and this particular one is wire gauges 20 to 30. There's a few different model numbers if you go shopping for them. I believe the only difference is the blades that come with it, because these blades are removable. So when these do get dull or wear out one day, you can just take off the blades, put new blades in, and continue to use the tool. And plus they make these a few different models, so you can, like I said, this is the 20 to 30. I know they also make one that goes from gauge 10 down to gauge 18, just depending on what wire you tend to work with the most. And again, it's not so expensive. If you continually work with lots of large and small gauge wire, you could have a couple of them. You could afford to do it. I mean, it's a little bit big in the toolbox, but so far it's a really nice tool. The mechanical action on it is really nice. And if you never used one, how it works is the wire just goes in this way, and as you squeeze it, of course, the blade side comes down to strip the insulation, but you also have this side that comes down and grips onto the cable itself. So then when it opens up, it just pops the insulation off that side and it holds the cable really securely. Two things that are nice about this. One, when that comes across, of course it goes at a slight angle just because this is all, goes rotationally, but I haven't broken a wire with it yet. And secondly, it's nice for like really small and really thin wires. And I'm thinking of, like, if you look at jumper cables on like the Noitra combo connectors, whatever, they're like a little bit difficult to do by hand just because they're a little hard to grip. That work is made very, very easily with these. So again, I haven't really used it long enough to figure out if I love it or not, but I certainly like it. And I'm glad that I made the investment on it. And last but not least, rulers and measuring devices in general. And this may seem obvious, but story for you is I was doing a lot of big woodworking projects this year. I'm not a master woodworker by any means, but I tend to get fairly good results on this kind of thing. And long story short, I just was not getting the results I was hoping to get on some things. Things were just not lining up. Like I'm doing a lot of panel work and that kind of stuff. And things were just not lining up or fitting quite as square and that kind of thing, right? So, and it took me a long time to figure out what was going on, but basically, I end up taking all my measuring tapes and rulers and squares and all that kind of stuff and putting them all down together and started measuring them off one another. And I discovered that probably a third of the things I was using to measure were just simply not accurate. And it's not that difficult to check. I mean, whether it's absolutely accurate or not is one thing, but whether if you use two rulers and they're not accurate with one another it's maddening. And again, if you just take them and just line them up with one another, all the lines should line up. You know, if you had the end of this one, 6 inches to be 6 inches, right? This one in particular, it was double-sided. It had a certain resolution on this, it had a different resolution on the other. You see this side is now black because I spray painted it because this side of the ruler is correct and this side is not. And let me tell you, there was a lot of cursing in the shop the day I figured that stuff out. So I had to pull out everything, and there were a couple of things that definitely had to go in the trash because they were just not accurate. So I just started thinking about how, like, going back and looking at all the techniques I used for measuring in the shop. And I realized one of the things I didn't have, so this is not a direct replacement. I did go out and get a better square and that kind of stuff, but I ended up going out and get a tool that I'd never had before. And that is a set of calipers. This particular one, this is the eye gauging Absolute Origin 6-inch digital electronic caliper. And this does metric, fractions, and inches. So this is a good example of a tool where you really want to look at how much you want to spend and if you want to, you know, save a few bucks or spend a lot more. So all the machinists out there right now that have their Mitutoyos are probably laughing and saying, man, I think it's a piece of junk. Man, I get it. And if you want to splash out like $100 or $200 on a Mitutoyo, by all means, they are absolutely excellent tools and I'm sure that you'll love it. I didn't really need that kind of accuracy. And it's one of those things that you have to take a look at the kind of work you're doing. I mean, if you're throwing like super hardened, you know, blocks of tool steel into like a vertical machining center and you need to mill the stuff down to like 2/10,000ths of an inch, then for sure you want to get a really, really good caliper, and you're probably into like micrometers and all that kind of stuff. For me, it's like, okay, I want to make sure I know exactly how thick this piece of plywood is before I put it in the CNC router. Or even just really simple stuff that's so much easier to measure with a set of calipers. Like, well, how wide is this cable? Because I need to put some heat shrink on it, and I have 2:1, and I don't want to get anything that's too thin because it's too hard to put on, and I don't want anything that's too thick because then it won't shrink down enough. Even just measuring diameter cables, stuff like this. You just end up using it for like 1,000 things that I've never used it before. And it's just nice to have that kind of confidence in your measure. And again, the resolution on this, I mean, maybe it's not perfect, but I mean, I think from the factory, it's at least a thousandth of an inch on the resolution on this. Let's say the resolution of this tool is greater than the resolution of my work. So this has been a real joy since I've had it, and it's one of those things that I find myself just using all the time. So that's about it for the tools and the new stuff. Do I have a wish list? I mean, like, who doesn't have a wish list, right? I'd still like to get a nice set of ball end Allen wrenches, maybe a couple stubby dedicated like number 1, number 2 Phillips screwdrivers. On the nut drivers, I may want to get a couple T handles for the ones that I use a lot just because I feel they're a little bit more comfortable. But for the most part, everything got so far, I really like it and I'm getting good use out of it. And hopefully I'm going to do a lot of good work with it this year. So, hope that answers some questions for you. I hope it kind of clarifies some things, maybe gives you some ideas for some tools that you need updating in your particular toolbox. And take care, and I'll see you next time.